My name is Alexandre Nequado. Well, I'm here with my colleague André Dudemaine. Now we have our next guest is Amandan Roy. Amanda, if you could introduce yourself to our audience.
Buzwah. My name is Amandan Roy. I am Bear Clan. I am from Wiikwemkoong Unceded Territory on Manitoulin Island. I'm Anishinaabe, and I think I already said I'm Bear Clan. And my English name is Amanda.
Quickly, bonjour. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Amanda. You presented yourself where you are from, but we would like you to also present Amandan Roy as an artist.
Oh, I don't know. My name's Amandan Roy. I'm an artist. I'm here in Montreal. I've been here it'll be 10 years in October. I've been here. I work in film and primarily I currently work at the National Film Board as an associate producer in the Quebec English documentary studio. Before that, I was in the animation studio. And and I do other things on the side, some of which is in an exhibit until the end of October.
And also, I saw you did a short film with Wabguni Mobile, and this is about the Jojagi, and this is our friend Sedalia Fadzio, who stars in that film. Very interesting.
You did your research, André. When I moved to Montreal, I used to be a business analyst. I used to work in IT. I had a very different career path. I got headhunted by a consulting company here, and I came here for this project I was supposed to work on, and the kickoff was here. I was supposed to be here for like 3 months, and then I was either supposed to go to Vancouver or Dallas. Supposed to go to Texas, and it turns out I didn't like the job and I didn't like the firm, so I ended up leaving. And I was going to go back to Toronto, which is where I was living and working before, and I still had my apartment there. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to hang out in Montreal for a bit and just check it out. And the worst that's going to happen is I'll pick up some French. So I stayed here, and I was just hanging out, living off my savings, and I was looking for stuff to do, and I ended up doing that film workshop. And because before that, I was looking for ceremony. I was trying to find ceremony. I used to go to ceremony in Toronto when I was living there, and there was a lot of access through Anishinaabe Help Toronto and people that I knew. So when I came here, I was looking for that, and it was during the TRC when it was here downtown that I saw there were sweats going on. And so I was trying to figure out how to get into those sweats. And then finally I think I posted on Facebook, I was just going to crash them and show up and see if they would let me in the lodge. And then Sedalia messaged me and said I could come. And that's how I met Sedalia. I was like kind of tried to crash her TRC sweats at the Botanical Gardens. And and I just met her, started talking with her more, and asked if she needed any help around the lodge. So that's kind of how I ended up helping out with the lodge with Sedalia. And when I did this film workshop, they were looking for something to talk about. I decided to talk about Sedalia and her sweat lodge in the Botanical Gardens because I thought it was really interesting.
It seems to me that the preoccupation of Sedalia to give back roots to young Indigenous in the city is also something you share with her, and that your work as an artist goes in that direction too. Am I?
Well, I think that, with Sedalia, I found it really interesting because Sweat Lodge isn't Haudenosaunee. It's not Ganikaha. It's So I thought it was really interesting that there was a Mohawk woman doing sweats, and she was doing it. Like she was using because she was taught by William Commanda and Pete DeConti. So I was like, okay, Algonquin's taught Sedalia, and that's where she got a lot of the teachings that she shares. And then speaking with her a lot, and finding out that she went to other areas to get teachings because she's in the city, she's in an urban setting, which means that there's a lot of people from all over who are reconnecting or just looking for a place to connect. So to kind of create, I don't want to say like a neutral place, but a place that was open to everybody was kind of the work that she does and behind that lodge. And I don't know, I think art does that in a lot of ways, is that it does create accessibility and starts conversations and dialogues, and art spaces really create that. I mean, for me, I never thought I would go into art. I was an IT analyst. I had a totally different career path and stuff, but it's for me, like education got me into a lot of buildings, but art is what got me out in the world. And it is through art that I've been able to travel all over Canada, and I've been hosting a lot of communities. So that never would have happened if I was in an office building, if I had gone with a different career path. But thankfully, art, I've been I lived up north for a couple of years with the Cree, the James Bay Cree. I've traveled to a lot of communities, and I've stayed in a lot of communities. So, and there's a lot of commonality there because, everybody went through colonization. We all went through these traumatic events at the same time, but there's still a lot of individuality there, or nationhood. And a lot of that, I think, comes out in art, and that's how you access it. And that's kind of a lot of people's first introduction to a lot of our nations and our cultures is art.
Is the Jojagi short films is the starting point of your implication in art?
Yes, it all started with that short film. I made it, and I did the editing myself, and I wasn't planning on doing anything with it afterwards. And it screened at Festival de Nouveau Monde, and I won a prize there. And the next day, I was going downtown, and my friend asked me to drop off some stuff at I can never say it; it's too long. At the Native Human Resources downtown. And actually, no, I think it was where Mamatu, the job program used to be hosted. And so I went to go drop it off, and Berenice was working there. And Berenice was like, "Oh, congratulations. I saw your film last night and you won the prize. Like, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just hanging out, enjoying life." And she's like, "Well, if you want to learn more about film, this production company is looking for someone to teach. So if you want to learn, you should contact them." So I said, "Okay, I'll think about it." She gave me the contact information, and it ended up being Paul Rickard at Mushkeg Media. So it was George Hargrave and Paul Rickard. I reached out to Paul and George, and they told me to come in for an interview. So I went in, and they hired me. And that's how I got started into film. Was I stayed at Mushkeg for over a year, and I ended up doing sound because for one shoot, the sound person didn't show up. I don't know what happened, and the plane was leaving in a couple of hours. So they just told me, go home and get packed and come back. And I had come from a film workshop, so I already had everything packed. So it was just, I was like, I haven't even unpacked. So they said, just go home and grab your bag, and we're going to give you a crash course in sound, and you're going to go do sound. So yeah, so I ended up in Smoky Falls, which is Northern Ontario, where they're doing a dam expansion project in Mushkegowuk. And yeah, I spent 2 weeks learning how to do sound, which was just, don't let it distort. Because if it's too low, you can bump it up, but if it distorts, you can't fix it. And that was, and through that, I ended up traveling a lot and going on a lot of shoots, because I ended up doing, I was a production coordinator, PA, production manager. I did a lot of stuff there, and then ended up becoming sound recordist. So I ended up going on a lot of shoots and traveling a lot, living out of a bag for a bit. And from there, I went with my friend to go pitch a TV series to Ernie Webb at Resolution, which is around the corner from Mushkeg. And so I went there, and then Ernie and I started talking, and then he called me afterwards and asked if I wanted to go work there. And I was like, well, I'm kind of good here, but it depends on what the project is. And so when he talked over some of their projects, I thought they were really exciting, especially Rumble. So yeah, I ended up giving my notice. It was pretty sad with George and Paul, because I feel that a lot of filmmakers, Indigenous filmmakers in Montreal, kind of got their start at Mushkeg. And Paul and George really trained a lot of us. So it was, yeah, but I left and, went to Rezo for a couple of years and learned a lot there. And through Rezo, I had an opportunity to go work on this virtual reality project up north, teaching Cree kids how to read and write in syllabics in a VR environment. And yeah, I went up to, I was traveling around the Cree communities up north for 2 years, and came back down south, worked at Niche Media for a bit on some of their TV series in Gatineau. And then I went to Imaginative, and an old coworker of mine was there and asked me if I wanted to meet for coffee. And then she asked if some people from the NFB could come. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. So that's how I ended up meeting Baral and Yelena from the animation department. And that ended up turning into me coming on as an associate producer for Hothouse. It was just a chain of events.
So well, it's interesting because it is, as you said before, a big switch. You were in this building and you open the window and you take your flight. You landed in Indigenous land. That's really a big turn in a life. And and you went in contact with the Cree Nation, especially in Northern Quebec. It's very special because with the James Bay Agreement, without the flaw of the agreement, anyway, they have some kind of autonomy, which is very special. So I suppose it is a life experience that gave you a new way to look at the indigenous nations and your own indigenous identity.
Yeah, I don't think that if I hadn't gone and lived with the Cree for those couple of years, I think my views on things like nationhood, Indigenous nationhood, Indigenous sovereignty would be very different. Because you see, they are a sovereign nation. They are a sovereign nation. So you see how that comes about, how forward thinking they were, and when they came up with that agreement, when they came up with the James Bay Agreement, and how all of those communities work together to make that happen, and how it works. And it's very well thought out. But when you see what a nation can do when they have that sovereignty, when they have control of their land, when they have control of their own resources, when they have a say in their education, in their healthcare, it's a lot different than, being on my community, like on my res. It's a lot different. I mean, we are unceded in that we've never signed over any of our territory, and we pretty much have all of our territory intact still. But we're moving towards it, but things like child welfare, are we in charge of that? No. To a certain degree we are. I mean, there are steps that are happening, but are we at the same place as the James Bay Cree? No, I don't think there's many that are. But it is, I don't see how you could go up there and as an Indigenous person and see how they operate and how things work and not get somewhat radicalized. And I don't even think it's radicalized. It's just seeing what sovereignty looks like or can look like. And I think the only places I've seen some communities are working towards that in certain degrees. But the language is there, the culture is there. People are very open, and there's a lot of resources there that they are able to make available because of their agreements they have with the Quebec government, right? With Hydro-Quebec and stuff. So like there, I learned to do a lot of traditional stuff because they're very open and it's part of their curriculum when they're in school, right? Like Cree Culture Week, Cree Culture classes, where it's part of their curriculum where the kids go out for a couple of weeks a year per semester and they go out and they learn to hunt, trap, fish, and all those things. And it's, and like everything's shut down for 2 weeks for goose break. They can do that because they are sovereign. They can shut down for like moose hunting for a week in the fall. That's very accommodating. People get bush days. There are a lot of things built in there that allows them to still have control of their land and still thrive and be successful, which I think is a model that other nations can follow or at least use as a guideline as everybody's kind of renegotiating treaties, or for areas that don't have treaties or revisiting that or making their way through the court system or trying to.
Can you speak also the work you did at the NFB? You were kind of curator of different projects by Indigenous filmmakers and artists.
Yeah, so my introduction to the NFB was I was the associate producer for their edition of Hothouse, and for that year they decided to do an Indigenous version of it. And so it was myself and Amanda Strong, who's in Vancouver. So it was kind of, I was on this end and they were on that end. And it was, we did a call out. We wanted to indigenize as much of it as we could within a government institution like the NFB, which is kind of mixed, but at the same time also really great because there's a lot of things that the NFB can do that perhaps other production companies can't. There is autonomy, there is a lot of knowledge, and everybody was very supportive. And we ended up getting, it was really tough. We were only supposed to take 2, and we ended up getting, I think, almost over 100 or almost 100 applications, which I was told was the most they've ever gotten, and it's usually like 6 spots that they have. So it was tough to wheedle it down to 2, and then it came to a point where we wanted to take 2 more that we felt very strongly about, Amanda and I. And well, it's like, well, how much does it cost? Well, you could take it out of our fees, or we can try and find money elsewhere. And it's like, or, you guys can like shake this tree and see what falls out, because I'm sure there's change all over the place. And it was Michelle Van Boosekom was really great in that, where she found the resources and said, okay, you guys can take on 2 more if you think you can handle it. So it ended up being, for me, it was really important to have people from community. I noticed that in a lot of films, there are different communities, right? There's urban communities, there's non-urban communities, and then, there's reserve communities. I wanted people from the res. So I was like, I want some res people in here, and I want to see some res animation. I want to see what that looks like. And that's how I ended up working with Meki. But Meki and I have known each other for a long time. Meki and I met at an animation workshop at UQAM years ago. And at that time, I think she was living in Joliet, I think. She wasn't in Montreal. And so that's how I met Meki. And Meki had a really good application, and working very closely with Meki and Chris Grant, who is Mi'kmaq from Pabineau First Nation. So both my artists, I got them right off the res. And I was like, okay, let's see what this looks like. And so Chris came from New Brunswick and he came and stayed in Montreal. Meki already lived here. And so those were the two films that I was in charge of, was Meki's The Fake Calendar and Chris's Exo Rad Magical. And for Meki's, it's she just wanted to talk about a day in the life of, and not necessarily deal with any of those stereotypes or anything, because it was very early in the conversation where we're talking about, well, what does Indigenous animation look like? Or what can it look like? What does Indigenous filmmaking or storytelling look like? Or what can it look like? What have we been told it looks like? And I was like, you know what? I was like, you're Indigenous. Whatever you do is Indigenous. I was like, you don't have to have feathers. You don't have to have drums. You don't have to have an eagle come by. I was like, you can do whatever you want. I was like, you're Indigenous coming from an Indigenous community. Whatever you do is Indigenous, point blank. Whatever story you tell is an Indigenous story. However you want to tell it is Indigenous storytelling. I was like, pretty much you can do whatever you want and I will support you. I will fight for you. I will back it up. I was like, so it's just like, let's go. So that was Meki's film, was just kind of like, she's like, I just want to talk about like a day in the life of me in the city. And I was like, okay. I was like, so there you go. And for Chris, Chris has schizoaffective disorder. He has a mental illness that he manages and he's very open about. He's very big on TikTok, sharing his experience. And he just wanted to show his experience trying to do something as simple as leaving his house to get a cup of coffee. So that was, that's the story behind Chris's film, and that's the story behind Meki's. They just wanted to tell something from their perspective. And I was like, that's Indigenous, let's go.
Yes, we are speaking of Meki Ottawa. Somebody, Alexandre knows pretty well. Mm-hmm. They are from the same community and the same generation. And also, we had fantastic work by Meki Ottawa during the last festival. She did an animation mural on the wall of the Cœur des Sciences on President Kennedy Street. And this is something that brought a lot of magic to our First Peoples Festival and installations on Place des Festivals. And she is a multimedia artist, very talented. And I understand very well how it would have been very important for you to back our initiative. So, and this is a beautiful film, obviously. And from NFB, finally, you arrive at more personal projects after.
Well, they're always personal. You work on them. You give feedback. You put a little bit of yourself into everything, no matter what you're doing, right? No matter what your role is. That's why the credits are so long. It's like it really takes a village to make a film.
Yeah, and I said more personal.
Well, I think that's kind of what's really great about the NFB is that they're when you work in like outside of the NFB is very unique in that there is no commercial marketing pressure. I mean, yes, everybody wants the films to do well. They want them to screen at festivals. They want them to be seen by everybody. Of course, you want that for any project, for any film. You want people to see it. The whole point of telling a story is you're sharing with people. You're communicating, so you want people to see it. You want it to be out there and marketed so that people know what it is and people know to come watch it. Whereas with the NFB, though, like yes, you do want that, but that's not the mandate here. That's not the purpose of here, to have a commercially successful award-winning film. It's like, yes, that is awesome if that happens, but that's not the point. The point is that it's a story that needs to be told, and it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter, you could be coming from some bougie high-rise penthouse, or you could be coming straight from the res. The whole point is, does a story need to be told? Should the story be told? People need to know this story. Whereas, in other production companies, it's kind of, you get more into numbers, like how many screens is it on? How many times have people seen it? Are you getting a return on investment? Because at the end of the day, it also is a business, right? And people invest in it and are looking to get their money back and maybe, hopefully make money off of it, along with, winning awards and the festival run and all that stuff. So it's when you have very different reasons for telling a story, I think you have a lot more opportunity to kind of do things differently. And so that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm still here rather than going back. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all know each other. We're all supportive, and everybody's doing really, really great work. Like, Sonia Portois Flora that just came out and stuff, like that's amazing. It's just there are different, I don't want to say pressures, there's just different markers that you have to meet depending on how you're going about things and where your funding is coming from, or who's supporting your project. Because then the more people you have kind of in the mix, then the more feedback you get, and the more you kind of the more things you have to navigate. Whereas here, you kind of don't have those pressures. It's if it takes longer, it takes the time it takes, then it takes longer. That's just, you kind of have the freedom to do that. I think that's what makes Hnatyshyn so special, and that's why it's very unique in this world of film production. Like with Hothouse, we were able to bring in a lot of Indigenous people to be mentored, where it was, okay, we're going to look for Indigenous people to work on these projects, and if we can't find them, then we'll find someone else, but they have to be willing to mentor somebody, because then we're going to try and find someone for them to mentor. So that's how we ended up with Travis Mercury, who was at Concordia at the time, or I think he had just graduated, doing sound design. So he ended up coming in and working with Luigi on doing the sound design for all of the films. Nicolas Renaud, we got him to come in and edit. So it was wherever we could find people who were Indigenous, we brought them in. Which I don't think you'd necessarily be able to do point blank through other production companies, because, there's funding involved, and there's, applying for grants or subsidies or things like that. Like, there's a lot of paperwork and follow-up behind it. Whereas here, it's just, can we do it? And why can't we do it? And then having someone supportive like Michelle, who's just like, yes, you guys can do it. I will find the money for you guys to do it. It's a lot more simpler.
Yeah, I remember it was in the last century. I went several times to different festivals in the United States, especially in San Francisco and New York City. And the Indigenous American filmmakers were always telling us Canadians, you are so lucky to have the ONF and FB to back your project, because the independent cinema in the United States, it's more difficult for us to get our way to make our project a reality. And already sometimes we feel that the United States, it's always better there. But I think as Indigenous artists, especially now with the new programs at the Council of Arts, we are really in advance in a way of them autonomous Indigenous arts segment alive in the country than they are in United States. I think we can be a model for the poor USA as they are right now.
Well, I think it's because a lot of like in Canada, like with the ISO, the Indigenous Screen Office, that's modeled off the Maori. So that's coming from New Zealand, and how they do filmmaking there is different. I worked on Dennis Goulet's Night Raiders, which was a co-production with New Zealand, and hearing how they go about filmmaking and how it's very different. You know, their days are shorter. There's like, yeah, we kind of just do like a 9 to 5, and you know, at the end of the day, if we want to keep going, we'll ask everybody, like, do you want to keep going? And if people don't want to, then we're like, okay, we're just going to do it till tomorrow. That would be unheard of here, because we've inherited the American film system, which is, you know, you're doing 14-hour days or 18-hour days, whatever it is, depending on what you're shooting or if you're chasing daylight. And it's and if you don't want to stay, well, you know what? Well, you just won't be back if you leave. So it was very interesting to hear the different ways that they work, and it's very collective based. And that idea of, you know, they're like, you know, we have to start recognizing filmmakers that are coming up that we want to support throughout their career, and kind of, you know, build them up, which is what they did with Taika Waititi. And it's just like, you know, they recognized him early in his career, and they really supported him to help him grow and to continue going on. And now he's doing Thor, but you know, he's on Reservation Dogs as an executive producer with Sterling Harjo, and he was the executive producer on Night Raiders. So it's just kind of they built and helped support him. I don't want to say they built him up, because he did a lot of the work, but you know, just having that support and people who believe in you and invest in you. And I think that's basically what it is that they invested in him, and he got to a point where he could give back and open up doors for other projects, and that's what he did. And he met Dennis from film festivals years ago. He met Sterling from film festivals years ago, as they were kind of doing the festival circuit with their shorts and their films. And, you know, he helped Night Raiders get made as an EP, and he did the same with Sterling Harjo and Reservation Dogs. So it's just kind of a different approach to filmmaking, and really investing in those people, which I think is does happen here, but I think it's gonna happen even more, because you have something like the Indigenous Screen Office, which is modeled on how the Maori do it.
What struck me in the way they work in Aotearoa is that they put a large amount of resources in short films. When the Indigenous filmmakers are doing their first step in the short films, they have almost the means of feature film. Here, you have to make with shoestring budget several short films, and then you can access maybe if things goes well, you can access for your first feature. But there, right from the start, you have the big crew with all the equipment, the support team that you would have on a bigger project, on a feature film, right at the beginning for your short films. And I know I have been critic of Telefilm Canada because after the success, they didn't see it arrive. But after the surprise success of Atanarjuat, the fast runner. They were willing to have quick, we need other Indigenous feature films. And I was telling them, no, look at New Zealand. Guys like YTT began by doing short films. And obviously, he won an Oscar for 2 Cars, One Night. And that was a masterpiece of cinema, a short film. And that was the big start for YTT. And in my view, they are doing better the way they see the training of the Indigenous filmmakers there than we are doing it in Canada.
Well, I think it's geographically they're smaller, so it's a lot easier to kind of have the same people and really build them up on projects. Whereas here we're spread out from coast to coast. It's quite wide, and people are stuck working within things like tax credits, which are provincial. So if you're from out of province, you don't qualify. If you bring people from out of province that you're trying to build up and to train and invest in, if they're not from that province, then you don't get tax credits, which is really hard because, you know, that really impacts your budget, and that money has to come from somewhere else, right? And everybody's already, you know, trying to make $5 out of a dollar already. Everybody's stretching everything really thin. And then you get into things here anyways, when you get into higher level productions means higher budgets. And so that means you start getting into tiers, and you also get unions into play. So then you have to deal with unions, and that is the same thing. They're all, they're localized. If you want to bring someone from outside, if they're a non-union member, then, you know, you have to get permits, or the union even says whether they can or they can't. So it's a bit more complicated, I think, than it probably is over there. And that's why, you know, if you're trying to build an industry, if you're trying to build like an Indigenous film industry, there needs to be, you need to change the system, because, you know, you can't be talking about, you know, we're going to decolonize and diversify, but you're not going to change the system. You're not going to change the rules. Nothing's going to change, but we're going to decolonize this colonial thing. And it's like, no, it's like, if you really want to use that word, that means that you have to be willing to change the structure. The system has to be willing to change. And in some points, that means that, you know, some things actually have to come down. It's you can't just red wash it and say it's decolonized. It's like, no. Those pillars need to come down in some instances. And those borders aren't ours. Provincial borders are not ours.
Yeah. But at least we have now the, as you mentioned, the Indigenous Screen Office, and Jesse Wenty, that is an important figure in Indigenous cinema. So we can hope that it will bring some of the change we need to be on the real path of decolonization.
Well, that's why you need organizations like that to really lobby. I mean, Jesse's leaving the ISO and Carrie Swanson's taking over, but, you know, that's why you need something. That's why it's important. That's why you need an Indigenous Screen Office, because they're the ones who are going to go lobby this to say that, you know what, if we're going to start building and investing in people and building an industry, then, you know, they need to be able to travel. Like, if you're trying to develop a camera person, because there's such a need for people behind the scenes or below the line. So if you're trying to, like, especially like camera people, sound people, editors. So if you have someone in, I don't know, New Brunswick, and you're working in BC, and, you know, everybody's like, okay, we're going to invest in this person, that needs to be possible, in that the unions have to be on board. And also the provinces need to be on board, especially with things like funding and tax credits. because they're all monitoring their percentages of, how much money is spent in whatever province or territory, where are these people coming from. Like those, there needs to be exemptions made to build people up, because everybody always gives back. That person's going to take someone else on and teach them. Like but you need to start. And it's so it's probably like everybody's gotten their start in documentaries, especially short docs, because it's low budget. You could do a very running gun. You just need a camera and a sound person, basically. Sometimes it's the camera person and the sound person are the same person, but they're very lean crews. And that's how a lot of people get started, is doing short docs. That's how I got started. Everybody kind of cuts their teeth in the documentary world because it is low budget and it is more agile. So you're not working with the unions. Maybe you are kind of working within the tax credits to a certain degree, but not. But there's more flexibility in that. But then to start going beyond that, which generally means more money, then you're going to kind of encounter these different obstacles.
And now we have seen during the pandemic years work that were signed Amandan Roy, not as a producer, but as the artist expressing herself. And there is two things that struck me. You did a mask, and also you work on the portrait of made by the famous Edward Curtis photographer. And mask and portrait are a representation of the face. And I think that's, you have there the interaction between the general public, if I can say, between the people that are now living here, coming from other continents, and the indigenous people. And also you use copper. And I know that native copper was used also traditionally, but you have a very original way to reconnect with tradition, making tradition, but with a very modern twist.
Oh, I did a lot of research, André. You're very prepared. Yeah, I've always been interested in traditional things, but it's one of those things also when you're growing up, nobody calls it traditional. Nobody uses that language. This is contemporary. This is traditional. It's just, we're just getting things done. This is it. And we're very resourceful. So we're using whatever is around. And a lot of that is still natural materials, but, our people are very adaptive. So it's, going up north, when I was living with the Cree, I would go to each Cree community has a cultural village. And so there's always stuff going on, or you could drop in to work on projects. And, it's minus 30. It's a long winter. So I would go down to the cultural village a lot. And even though I didn't speak Cree or anything, it's, the old school gestures. And I would just sit there and I would just watch. And, I started helping out on things like hides, or just watching them like break down a moose, or just working with materials and making things like snowshoes or crooked knives, things like that, tamarakis. And when I came back down, I started getting more interested in making traditional things. So I started learning to work with birch bark from Pinnock Smith, who's from Kitigan-Zibi. And he's an Algonquin canoe maker, and he makes other things. And I did this, I was part of a group of people who helped Pinnock make 2 birch bark canoes. So that's how I learned to work with birch bark, was through Pinnock. And I got really interested in it because I started learning more about birch, wigwas, and how important that tree is to Anishinaabe culture, but it's kind of one of those things that's kind of fallen off, but has come back. And it's, it's the Anishinaabe tree of life. It's like that tree really takes care of you. It does everything. So it's just, it's such a beautiful material to work with. And after working with Pinnock and learning that, when the pandemic started, I started seeing all these masks, and I was like, you know what? It kind of looks like the front of a canoe. And I was like, I want to try and make one out of birch bark. And the scraps that Pinnock gave me to play around with, because he was showing me how to make baskets and stuff. So he gave me a lot of the smaller pieces that we didn't use for the canoe, like the roots and stuff. And he's like, oh, you can learn how to do this. And he showed me how to work with winter bark and how to do scraping. So I had all these pieces in my apartment. And I just decided to go for it. And thankfully it worked out on the first try, because I didn't have any, that was the nicest bark I had. And it is representation. I work in representation all the time. I'm very aware of how we are viewed, where that comes from, and why it's there. And I work with Alanis a lot, and I was talking with Alanis before, and this is when we were doing Hothouse, and I had this conversation with somebody, and then I was kind of frustrated afterwards. And so we were talking about it, and she was like, why are you upset? And I was like, well, because I was like, this person is not Indigenous. And I was like, they're pushing and I'm pushing back. And it's just like, well, I don't get it. I don't understand it. And I was like, but that's okay. It's like, because it's not for you. So if you don't get it, I was like, it's not for you. And maybe you should think about that. And maybe there's a sidebar of learning and discovery that you should do on your own, but it's not on us to educate you. And I was like, the whole purpose of what we're doing here is just to tell a story. And we're not going to explain the res jokes. We're not going to break it down. We're not educating. We're just telling a story. And then talking to her, like when I did that short film on the Sweat Lodge, being told a lot, well, you need to show the lodge and the inside. And I was like, no, I was like, I'm not showing that. I was like, why? And it's like, well, because we need to see, people don't understand. I was like, well, I don't care if they don't see or understand. And I was like, it's not for them anyways. I was like, any Native person who sees this is going to know. I was like, they don't need to go inside. They don't need to see. I was like, they know why we don't show these things. I was like, so why do I need to take 10 seconds out of my 2 minutes to put that in there? And I was like, who is this for? I was like, well, this is for my community. If other people see it, great. If they get it, great. But that's not who it's for. So to be honest, I don't really care. And then talking with Alanis, and I was like, I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me why we have to keep educating, and we have to take screen time away from just telling our stories or doing what we want to do to educate. And I was like, I'm not Christian, I'm not Jewish, but I can watch a film and they could talk about a bar mitzvah. I know what it is. I know what a christening is, which are, other communities' ceremonies. And nobody educates me and explains what a bar mitzvah is. Nobody educates or explains to me what a christening is. It's just assumed that I know. And if I don't know, I will go find out through other resources. I was like, so why can't we do that? And so Alanis's answer was that because there have been so many, she's like, hundreds of years of miseducation put out there about us that wasn't done by us. Now that we have the opportunity to actually have a platform and have a voice, we're trying to undo, a lot of people are trying to undo or counter all of that miseducation that's been done. And that's why. And she's like, and eventually it will get to a place where we don't have to do that or feel we have to do it. And I was like, okay, I understand that. I was like, but I'm just not going to do it. And if people want to come to me about it, I'm just going to say, well, it's not for you. And if you don't, especially if you're a settler and you've been here for like, your family's been here for like 500 years, you should probably think about that, why you don't know and why you're intentionally not educated about it. But I'm not going to give you any screen time. And it's just this whole idea of representation, and it comes down to like those Curtis photos. Like, where did this start? How far back does it actually go? And a lot of it goes back to Curtis and his mission to document, the romantic disappearing Indians, where it was his life mission. He got money, he got JP Morgan money to, I have to go capture all these Native people because they're going to disappear and their way of life is going to disappear, and I have to go document it. And those images they're very beautiful images. They are very, very beautiful. But, and I've gone to arguments with people where it's just like, well, they're also staged. A lot of them are staged. People weren't living or dressing that way at the time he took those photos. It was very much a white man's dream of what we look like. And those have had such an impact throughout media that, I'm here, 100 years later, over 100 years later, still dealing with the ripples of that and the representation it means. When I first did those, and some of them were online, I got a lot of backlash. I had a lot of threats and a lot of angry people. And majority of those people were white people who were very, very angry, saying, well, how could I do that to them? How could I make them smile when they were going through things like genocide? Their land was being taken away. Their children were being taken away. Their women were going missing and being murdered. And it's like, that never stopped. It's still ongoing. That never stopped. And I was like, there's this breakdown in the psyche of these people and how they view us, where it's like, these are things that all happened in the past and they're not ongoing. Like, this happened in the past. We didn't do this. This happened generations ago. And this is what these photographs are capturing, which is not true. And arguing with people, it's like, that never stopped. That's still happening. What do you think is going on with Standing Rock? It's like, it never happened. As like especially in the States, it's like, they don't even document. They have no records of how many Indigenous women have gone missing or murdered. They don't keep stats on that.
I think here we have to take a few seconds to explain to the listener of this blog that what you did, you use the AI technique to make the portrait of Indigenous people made by Edward Curtis at the beginning of the 20th century. They are all with a very serious face on the photograph, and then you make them smile, and that's interesting. Actually, I know why they look serious. I know that had reinforced prejudice, but at this time, the sensibility of the material to take the photograph was very low. So you had to stay, don't move for 1 minute. They had even stands in the studio to make portraits. So that's why the people in the photographies always look like that, because the exposure time was long. But at the same time, obviously, and it was not easy to. If you look at the studio photography of the white notability people, they are not smiling neither, and they are on the good side of the society. They could smile, but at the same time, it's the result of those photographs that are staged. Obviously, they have changed. They have put traditional clothes that were not at use normally in everyday life. And in the studio photography, you can see it even today. If you have a white person at the same time, you see that they have put their Sunday finest clothes to be photographed. And you understand that. You know that they are not, this is not their everyday life. But as people don't know about Indigenous communities, when they see those photos, they have not this possibility to distance from the stage point of view of the photograph. And also the vanishing race was the ideological perception of the colonial society. We were supposed to be wiped out of the history. So obviously, you have to look serious if you are disappearing. So the technique of photography just happened to reinforce the colonial view of our people. So it's very interesting, I think, that you take the liberty to change those masks, because this is some kind of mask we have there, and to make them more human. I think we somehow we connect to the soul of those people, not with the change you made, not only the mask they have for photography.
Well, it's I used a combination of AI and Photoshop for those, and it's a really common misconception that the exposure times were that long. They're not. They're actually seconds. I learned to do wet plate, and depending on the lighting, it's about 6 seconds exposure time. And I've actually worked with Marcello Trausch, who is he's a very well-known wet plate photographer here in Montreal, and that's who I learned with. And we've discussed this thoroughly because Curtis was actually using dry plate. So it's daguerreotypes, wet plate, dry plate, and then eventually you kind of get photo paper. And the exposure times for dry plate were even lesser than wet plate. And with wet plate, doing it now, it's, on average, it's about a 6 seconds exposure. So it's a very common misconception with those photos, or we were like, oh, they weren't smiling because you can't hold a smile for like 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And I was just like, oh, it's like, okay. And I was like, no, it's actually like 6 seconds. And if you're doing it.
Probably at the sun outside, because when you are inside the studio, I think if you have not the sunlight, you have a longer exposure, no?
You will have a longer exposure, like maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but we're not talking minutes. If you were to actually if you were to do that for like a minute or even longer, unless it was really dark, your plate's going to be overexposed. It's a really interesting thing, because I've had this arguments a lot where it's like, well, you can't smile if you got to sit there for 10 minutes. And I was like, no, you can't. I was like, but was that actually what the exposure times were? And it's like, no, it's like, I'm sitting here with Marcello with a camera from the 1880s with a brass lens and in a studio with like studio lights. It's like, yeah, it's instant, but you take away the lights and it's seconds of exposure. And if you're outside on a good day, it's seconds of exposure. It's not minutes. And there are photographs. There are other plates that he did where they are smiling. So it was very much a stylistic choice. So that's, and I don't know. It's like I don't know why the idea of a smiling Native person aggravates people so much. It makes them so angry. I was talking to one of the descendants of Poundmaker, and we were talking about it, and I was like, is this offensive? And he's like, no. He's like, I heard that he had a great sense of humor, and he joked around a lot and he laughed a lot. And he's like, so this is more like a family photo than something that a white man did to put out there for other white people. So this disconnect in emotion, so that, you know, they wouldn't feel bad about going and removing all these people, especially in the States, and putting them on, putting them on, displacing them, putting them on the Trail of Tears and things. It's like there's a way to like see people, but also emotionally disconnect. And I was like, these people are getting really angry because they're smiling because they see a person. And that's a lot more harder to digest everything that's going on. And it's like, okay. And then the second part is like, well, that happened in the past, where it's like, no, it's still ongoing. Never stopped. We're still here. People are still smiling. I go home. Everybody's laughing. You know, it's like, it's, you know, Native humor and that resilience that has got everybody through and still is, right? And it's just, that's why it's Native humor and joy is rarely expressed in media. And outside of reservation dogs, like reservation dog Sterling was actually showing people, like Native people laughing and like experiencing joy. Whereas, and a lot before it's kind of heavy. It's not really, there's not really a lot of joy. And when I was up north, we're talking about Indigenous representation in one of my classes. And the kids are like, I don't like watching movies about Native people. And I was like, why? They're like, because they're all just sad robots. And I was like, no, they're not. And it's like, well, name something where they're not. And I was like, oh. And I was like, I will think of something outside of smoke signals. So I was like, but even that's kind of heavy. And then it's like, and I was like, yeah, it's like you start flicking through stuff. And I was just like, man, I was like, this goes all the way back to Curtis. I was like, and he was even the first person who did like a short film about Indigenous people. And it's the same thing. It's like you're just stoic and emotionless. And I think that for a lot of settlers, it's a lot easier to ignore what's going on with Indigenous people or what happened, or put it in the past, because if you don't see people as people, then it's very easy to just disconnect emotionally.
I remember when I heard you speaking, I remember I was working with Arthur Lamotte, the documentary filmmaker that had made films about the Innu Nation, the traditional life of Innu Nation, very fantastic film in collaboration with the elders of the nation. And when he wanted to do all of a sudden a film about contemporary Indigenous artists in 1995, it was so surprising that many people, I was working with him, and many people were asking me if he was mentally stable, right? Because it was strange, so strange for them that this person that had been connected to traditional life all of a sudden is connected to a contemporary artist. And we had a small demo to the film that to show what kind of film Arthur was willing to do. And we have several now famous artists like Robert Hull in Amsterdam in a gallery with other Indigenous artists. And I remember a person who was an authority in an institution that I have shown her this demo, telling, look, it's interesting. That's real art, it's real arts, and this is contemporary, and this is still Indigenous. And at the end, she told me, yes, but they look happy.
But it's what is contemporary when you're so adaptable. I work with copper, so if I'm not using, I don't know, stone tools, is it all of a sudden contemporary? It's not traditional anymore. It's to me, it's very strange. It's like I come from an area, the Great Lakes, where there's a history of of copper working. We are coppersmiths. We had copper mines, and it's just and copper is used a lot in ceremony, and it's still. I just found it very odd going to the lodge. Like copper is used a lot in Medewan ceremonies, Medewan Lodge, and everybody's using these little copper vessels that are made in India, brought from India, and it's just. And I was like, why? I was like, why aren't we doing this anymore? So that's kind of where I was. I was at the Zares. I was just looking around, and I saw this copper tube, and I went and looked at it, and it was an embossing kit, and I had no idea what embossing was. I was just really drawn to the copper, so I bought it, and then I went and watched. I went and researched embossing, and I watched some YouTube videos. And I was like, I'm just going to go for it. And and that's when I ended up making that smaller mask out of copper. And that's how I started working with copper. And then after that, I got more comfortable. And I did that plague mask, which is using traditional medicines that are generally used for cold. And it was something they were recommending, these medicines for people to try and like boost your immune system for COVID. So that's actually what those 3 medicines are on the side, and working with copper, and then wanting to learn how to work with copper more, and getting into metalsmithing. But it's a natural material, and it's very central to our ceremonies. So it's just like, why aren't we doing that ourselves?
Is it accessible online to learn these things?
Well, it was a pandemic. The pandemic is stuck at home. So it was, for me, it was, okay, I'm stuck at home. I have to do something. And that's where that birch bark mask came, because looking at that bin of like scraps that Pinnock gave me, I was like, okay, I'm going to keep busy. And for the copper working, I've learned a lot of stuff online. It's the beauty of YouTube. And it was, when I started doing embossing, and then when I was playing around with etching copper plates, I learned all of that on YouTube. All of it. I just watched a lot of videos.
So it is accessible through YouTube.
You can learn anything online. Like even with my metalsmithing, I watch a lot of YouTube. And I follow a lot of metalsmithers. I don't even know what the proper metalsmiths on Instagram.
Is it from the Anishinaabe people that you learn from, or just like some people that knows how to smith?
Well, it's a lot of it is non-Indigenous, and a lot of Indigenous people who are doing metalsmithing, they're working with silver. They're making jewelry. You don't really see a lot of people working with copper in general, because copper is a softer metal, and a lot of people are just, like, for casting and stuff, it's considered to be like a dirtier metal. It's less clean to work with than silver or gold. Personally, I can't stand gold, so it's silver and copper. So working more towards working in copper, and kind of bringing it back, because for me, I wanted to wear jewelry, but I couldn't find anything that was Anishinaabe. A lot of jewelry is West Coast line form, which is beautiful, or it's from the South, which is beautiful, but I don't understand it, because it's not mine. I don't know what these things are, like outside of like squash blossoms and stuff, but they're very Southern. And so I was like, there's not really anything Anishinaabe, and I want to make stuff that I want to wear, which is Anishinaabe. So I started learning how to make it. So I started with the birch bark rings and clan jewelry.
Yeah, I think I have the same issue with that schematic designs, but I saw that some people are trying to go back to those designs, and they're inspired by the medicine plants, or what berries that we eat, or the fruits that we eat.
Yeah, it's but those were always part of our art. They used to be, whether it was like beadwork or whether it was birch bark etching or just whatever, like painting. Like those were a part, they are a part of our culture and how we express ourselves. And it's just for some reason it just hasn't made its way into metal, or it was in metal, it just kind of fell off. So that's I'm going to start learning hammering because I want to start making cups. I just want to make copper cups. So it's and for me it's just, you know what, I would like to make my own ceremonial items rather than buying something that's made in India. Not that there's anything wrong with that. People are adaptable. They use what they can, and if the intentions are there, I'm not knocking it. I think it's actually really good. People are doing the best they can with what they have. But I don't think there's anybody really working in copper anymore, at least around here. Or maybe they're just not online. They're just, old school. They're not putting it all over Facebook or Instagram. I think the only person I know, Anishinaabe person, who's working with copper is Michael Belmore. But it's more art, like sculptures, that he's doing, and he does these really amazing large sculptures with copper, but not necessarily smaller items like jewelry or anything. And it's a very beautiful material to work with because it is soft. So I think it's probably an easy metal for people to start with. Even if they're just doing embossing, it's very beautiful. It's what they used to call native gold.
Yes, I know there was before the contact what they call today native copper. It was copper that was easier to find because it was not.
Yeah.
You didn't have to dig; it was there. And it was very precious, obviously, because it was not common. And it was used for, obviously, for a ceremonial or a sacred or very special occasion.
Yeah, so that's, well, because I'm from the Great Lakes, so there were copper mines, but also, like in certain areas, you would find natural copper in the bodies of water. And then people would take those and they would use that to form to make things, whether it was jewelry or ceremonial items, right? And so now in ceremony, you don't really see a lot of copper, or the copper that you do see, it's there are things being made in India that people are ordering, like through Amazon or whatever, and getting it shipped over. So it's that's kind of my trip right now, is learning more about copper and working with copper. And yeah, I'm going to start learning hammering. So I'm going to start making my own copper cups hopefully soon.
And I also saw that very interesting when you have made this birch bark mask. You look around, you didn't go deep in the forest, but you found all your material around your environment. And this is a very, very traditional way. You have to gather the material in your natural environment when you do something.
The majority of stuff for that mask were harvested from the parks of Hochelaga. Because I live right by a park, and there's like a row of pines along Notre Dame. So those pines are where I got the roots and the sap from when I went walking down there. And then I got the design from the flowers that are growing off the side of Notre Dame in the ditch. So outside of that, like, yeah, it's I just went for a walk around Hoche, and with my knife scaring people because I was digging and cutting stuff, and I had a big buck knife. Probably should take something smaller, but yeah, yeah, I forgot about that. I did the majority of stuff for that mask was from Hochelaga. One.
And I said that also you work with Nico Williams. And when we interviewed Nico Williams, he did also that because he had put beads over the cereal box that he found on the sidewalk in front of his apartment. So that's the same way to connect with the immediate surrounding that is also a part, I think, of our traditions.
I'm laughing because Nico and I are neighbors. We both live in Hochelaga, and he's around the corner from me. So I just think it's funny because we're both Anishinaabe here outside our communities in Ontario, and we're both walking around getting inspired by Hochelaga with our art and gathered materials in our neighborhood. Tell them that.
Well, at least Hochelaga is supposed to come from in the Indigenous world, but at least it's certainly a connection with the fact that Montreal was and still is today an Indigenous land. And your presence there, you, Nico, and several others, is also a testimony of the fact that, as it is said in sometimes in only lip service, but at least we can pinpoint the reality of it. Montreal is an Indigenous land.
Oh, it totally is. It's like the island of Montreal. I've heard different things about it, asking, people in Ganawagi, like, what was the island before? What you guys do with it before? Like, what was it? And one person told me that it was like a summer field. It's where they grew corn, and because they would come over, they would do agriculture, and then they would grow things because Mount Royal was very rich, especially with all the runoff and stuff. So it was very ideal for growing corn. So they would grow corn, they would harvest it, and then they would go back to the mainland because you couldn't stay there on winter because it's not a big enough island to sustain people, like with food sources for winter, which is mostly animals. But then I've also heard from other people that it was a big market. It was a big Indigenous market that the Haudenosaunee hosted every year, and it was nations from all over would come down on the old native highways, all these water systems, and they would come to trade. And it was just a big Indigenous market that the Inuit would come down, the Cree would come, you guys would come, people from the States would come up, and because they're all connected to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. And it was just a big market. It was a big trading place that we hosted. So that's my understanding of what it was. And then there was like the village of Hochelaga, which there's a lot of Anishinaabe are living there. There's like a group of us who have kind of taken over it, I think, to a certain extent. And Nico's studio is there. So I guess it's going to turn into a little niche art hub in Montreal. Just everybody should move to Hochelaga. That's all I'm going to say. Love it.
And usually we finish with Alexandre, who is doing some linguistic research, and he always surprises us. So I guess there will be an Anishinaabe connection with his choice today.
First, I was wondering, does Nico and you speak the same dialect, Anishinaabe?
No. Nico is Ojibwe. My community is a Three Fires community. Mm-hmm. So that means we're Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. It's primarily an Odawa community, but after the war and everybody getting displaced, my community took in a lot of displaced families. So my mother's side, they're Potawatomi from Wisconsin and got displaced, and Wiikwemkoong took them in. So there's a couple of communities that are around the Great Lakes. There are Three Fires community where they're either Ojibwe or Odawa, and they took in our displaced relatives in. and allowed us to settle there. So, and my dad's Odawa, so he's like, we've always been here. He's like, your mom, like they're the ones who came from the mainland. So, but it's part of our Chinoknagewin, like our constitution, that we recognize that all three dialects are spoken there and they're respected. So it really depends on, it's primarily Odawa, but it really depends on your family, what dialect you speak in my community. So Odawa, that's Odawa, the word is Odawa.
This is like a reality that we don't see often in Quebec. Many that you have many dialects in a reserve.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's Three Fires Confederacy. It's the three brothers. So when the other brothers got displaced, the other brothers would take them in.
Yeah, and as for your title of exhibition, is it how do we say it?
If I'm going to say it, I'm going to say it Odawa, which is really fast, which is Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe. Okay.
But when Nico says it, like he breaks it down slower and he pronounces everything more, which is an Ojibwe pronunciation.
I tried to translate, but it's pretty hard to find it in the dictionary. So what does it mean?
What does it mean? Well, first off, because most of the dictionaries online are Ojibwe, and Odawa, people say it's slangy, but it's not slangy. It's a different dialect, and they speak fast, and so sometimes when they're speaking, some of the sounds may get dropped, but when you write it, you know it's there. So for this, I worked with my Aunt Helen Roy. She was she's an Anishinaabe teacher. She used to be the professor at Michigan State University, and she's retired now, but she does language camps and things. And so when I was looking for a title for this, we had a discussion about it because the way that she translates the language is she goes by the sounds and the meanings that are associated by the sounds. So she's like, well, if you want to go by the English, it's just, she calls them TLC, which is translate like crap. And she's like, the TLC for this is just saying like, it's shown, it is shown. And she's like, but she's like, if you want to translate, that's fine. She's like, but if you want to understand, she's like, we have to break it down.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now that you've said it, I understood. I think I have a word for Hnatyshyn. I would say Ajigiwamiden.
Okay.
Ajigiwamiden.
So, yeah, because I see what you put in the comments, and it's kind of the same because I did put an edit on the text. If you go see the exhibit, it was last minute when they were doing the cards because it was to the wire. And I put an edit on the text, which was that going by after discussions with my aunt, she's like, well, if you break it down this way in context to the work, what it's saying and what it means is that they are being shown visibly as they really are in a physical form. And she's like, she's like, by the smile, she's like, we're seeing them as they fully are. We're seeing them as they really are. And she's like, we're referring to the photograph, so in a physical form.
So what I tried to translate is Ajigiwamiden, but it's hard to translate it in different language. So I tried to translate this part of the word.
Yeah.
See, I understand that it's something like this seen or montré, showing. It's shown.
Yeah.
So if I said it in Atikamek, I would say Waptamiam say it shows, it is shown, demonstrated something. Waptario, it shows something to someone. Waptarihueo, show something to people.
Yeah, that's actually really close. Because originally I didn't have the A at the beginning, and it was, and she's like, well, she's like, you have to put the A at the beginning. She's like, or you should. She's like, because the meaning behind that sound is that it's referring to something physical. And she's like, you could leave it off. She's like, but if you're talking about, you want people to look at this physical thing and that's what you're referring to, she's like, you should put the A in front of it. because most of the translations I saw when I first came to her, the A wasn't there. It started with the Z, and that was part of our discussions. And she's like, what are you trying to say, and what is this about? And it was a big conversation. But I think if you were to take the A off of it and you were to just do Wabaden, you would probably see a lot more translations online.
Yeah, it's easier to understand. Wabaden is like seeing or I see you.
Yeah.
So if we look at the planning tree, Wapti here, it's like the same word that show something. Anishinaabe wap done where exhibit things or show off. This is funny. This one is funny. 473 wap tenio wap tinuel wap tanuel. There's different words to say it. So imun wap tenio. Eastern Cree, Wapati Yo, Naskapi Wapati Yao, Moose Cree, Swampy Cree, Wapatilio, or Wapatilio. So for me, it's like it's it's like no, I see you, no, I see it.
Yeah, like you're seeing it as it really is. You're seeing it. You're seeing it.
Yeah.
You're really seeing it. So that's the idea behind it, and I think it's probably because I know there's a lot of similarities between our languages, and I know there's connection between our communities because there are words that in my language that I know, like Meki understands. So it's or community names, like there is there's a community on the mainland called a Hnatyshyn.
I understand that it's connection.
Yeah, because that's Meki is like, you must understand this, and she's just like, of course. So it's I think your translation, I think is pretty much it.
I try to do my best.
Yeah.
Can add that to your Wikipedia, Alex.
Okay. Now, I think we have learned to see better and to discover beyond the mask the artist, the woman, and the Montrealer. And also, I think we will now look forward to your next project, and let us know. We will run to see it when you premiere it. Would it be in a cinema or a gallery or a park or a sweat lodge?
Just everywhere.
Yeah, so I think that's wrapped this episode.
Okay.
Miigwech, thank you for being with us, and I guess we'll see you next event.
Yeah, we'll see you around. It's like I'll see you soon, Alex and André. Sorry, I was going to call you Alexandre. But Miigwech, both of you.
Matashi.
Hnatyshyn.
Mama.